welcome everyone to the People's House.
Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
This bill says that New York understands the breadth and the depth of the problem.
Welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Tom Abinanti. If you live in the town of Greenburgh or the town of Mount Pleasant, I'm your Assembly member, and thank you for joining us. I'm here today with Ed Rush. Ed is a resident of Elmsford.
Yes.
And you've lived there for how long now?
All my life, 56 years.
And you are also a member of the Board of Trustees in Elmsford.
Yes, I am.
How many terms is that now?
I think I'm on my 12th year.
A CPA?
Yes.
You still practicing as an accountant?
No, not anymore. No, once I got promoted to fire chief, I gave that up.
You've moved over to another public service job.
Yes.
You're the Hartsdale fire chief.
Yes.
What is the structure in a paid department like that?
Well, Hartsdale is actually, it's a combination department. We're both paid and volunteer. It's a fire district, so it's a separate taxing district within the town of Greenburgh with a separate board of fire commissioners. And I'm the chief of the department, so I run the day-to-day operations of the department. And we have 36 career firefighters, and then right now we have about 15 volunteer firefighters also.
Now, Elmsford is all volunteer.
Yes.
And you were a volunteer in Elmsford for a while, right?
Yes.
How long was that?
38 years.
38 years. You have a family?
Yes.
And
yes.
You raised the family in Elmsford?
Yes.
So
yeah,
you're a lifelong resident and
right.
dedicated to the town of Greenburgh.
Right. All my children were involved in the volunteer fire department also before they moved on. But
you're up here today as a representative of the New York State Association of Fire Chiefs.
Yes, I'm on the Government Affairs Committee for the New York State Association of Fire Chiefs, and today's our legislative day. We're up here to see about getting some of our legislative priorities looked at and hopefully passed.
Well, sometimes we get people who come up and lobby us because they're paid lobbyists and they've been told by a client, this is what we need. You, on the other hand, have lived through many of these problems, I would guess, as a trustee, as a volunteer, and now as a chief of a department. You know of which you speak.
Yes, yes, and that's why I think it's easy for us to come up here and talk about these issues because we've seen the dire results of what can happen.
This is a long list. Let's just talk about a few of them. The first one I see here, that illegal occupancy in multifamily dwellings. Is that a real problem in our area? Yes,
it's a very, very big problem. What has happened over the years as some of the older residents have moved on, the cost of housing is fairly high and the young families can't afford to move in. So when they look to sell the houses, what happens a lot of times, people are buying them up and they're splitting them up into illegal 2, 3, 4, 5 family houses, putting people in, basically living in conditions that nobody should have to live in. I mean, I've seen bedrooms in the back of boiler rooms, bedrooms in attics, entire families living in one room.
I know the building inspector of the town of Greenburgh not that long ago, last couple of years, I think issued some serious violations. And wasn't there a fire was it in Greenburgh or was it just was it White Plains where there were some people hurt?
Well, unfortunately, there was a fire. It was in the town of Greenburgh, but it was the Elmsford Fire District a couple months ago where unfortunately a small child was killed in a fire in an illegally converted attic. And then not too long ago, there were 2 separate fires in Mount Vernon where multiple people were killed in illegally converted living spaces also. So it's a very big problem. And it's also an extremely big problem for the first responders. Some firefighters, everybody's familiar with the Black Sunday fire in the city, where a number of firefighters were killed and some seriously injured because they were forced to jump out a 5th floor window because the fire escape, they couldn't get to the fire escape because the apartment had been illegally converted and they had an illegal wall blocking off the portion of the room that led to the fire escape.
I think it's important that the fire service explain to the public why we have these rules. I think a lot of times people just see government is in the way, but you're talking about situations where government regulations made sense and where people violated them and others were killed because, or hurt because they violated the rules.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, the rules are there for a reason. I mean, I know some people see, you know, some rules as being silly or, you know, big brother watching and all that, but there's a reason. It's to protect them and it's to protect us as first responders.
Similarly with the second one on your list, upholstered furniture fire safety standards. What's that one all about? Well,
the way that furniture and a lot of the, you know, the furnishings and everything inside houses these days, it's being made with a lot of plastics and a lot of flammable material. And fires now, they burn so fast and so hot. I mean, I've seen fires where literally, you know, people just can't get out of the house because the fire spreads so quickly. And one of the most, you know, smoking is actually the leading cause of home fire deaths. 66% of home smoking material fire fatalities resulted from smoking material, or in, you know, couches and things like that. And there was a law that was passed a few years ago for fire-safe cigarettes. That has made a huge impact. It's reduced those numbers quite a bit. But we need to do something about the flammability of these furnishings, especially couches, because if you do drop a match, a cigarette, or whatever, even with the fire-safe cigarettes, these things can light up, and they just go so fast that nobody has a chance to get out. And they use some of these materials to make things less flammable, but those chemicals can be extremely harmful, especially if they do catch fire, or even if they don't. The chemical itself can be harmful to people when you're continuously breathing in the fumes and all. So there's some legislation that would, you know, pass a bill to make these furnishings much more fire safe without the use of these chemicals.
I think the first two that we're talking about are the types of legislation that really make a lot of sense, but are the types of legislation that people scoff at. They look at it and say, why is government getting involved in what my furniture is made out of? Why do they care how many rooms? It's my house, it's my apartment. I want to divide it up the way I want to divide it up. And they don't really understand that in the end, they're endangering people.
Exactly.
I mean, as you say, with the fire-safe cigarettes, I think that was scoffed at the time as well. But I remember that was a high priority of the fire service.
Right.
And people were surprised that, you know, here's government interfering with what they smoke. And when we point to the fire service and say, yeah, but there's a reason for that, these guys know what they're talking about. And they're trying to prevent fires. And that's why we're doing this. And as you said, there's an example of laws that worked.
Exactly.
Now we have to do the next thing.
Exactly. It's comparable to the seatbelt law. I mean, for years, a lot of people scoffed at the seatbelt law and said, you know, why should the government tell me I have to wear a seatbelt? But that law has saved thousands and thousands of lives. We see that every day. Accidents where if people weren't wearing their seatbelt, they would have been killed. And, you know, they walk away with, you know, minor injuries because they had their seatbelt on.
You have a provision in here about eliminating the exemption from the seatbelt law for volunteer fire and EMS emergency vehicles. What's that about?
Right. There's actually a provision in the law that, you know, you're required, as I mentioned, seatbelts, you're required to wear seatbelts. But there's an exemption that driving an emergency vehicle or riding in an emergency vehicle, you don't have to. I think it was passed with good intentions at the time because, you know, they felt like they didn't want to burden the first responders if they were trying to put their gear on and things like that. But quite frankly, you know, first responders are killed in emergency vehicles on a fairly regular basis also. And it's absolutely imperative that first responders be wearing their seatbelts also. So it's just trying to eliminate that exemption in the law that, you know, would allow the first responders to not have to wear them.
I think too often people take emergency responders as for granted. We have a lot of people in Westchester, for example, who come from New York City, and they just kind of expect the world to work like New York City works. And when they get to the suburbs, they don't realize they have a septic system, not a sewer system. Or they don't realize that they may have well water rather than, you know, they don't just turn the faucet on. You have, and I think the same thing with emergency services. They just expect that somehow somebody's going to show up. And that's not always the case. I mean, for example, in Elmsford, you have a volunteer fire department that serves as a volunteer ambulance corps.
Yes.
And I notice you have one piece of legislation here, which I'm very supportive of, which would allow volunteer fire departments throughout the state to charge for the services they provide as emergency responders for ambulance services. Yes. What's that one about?
All right, that's a very, very important law that we've been trying to get passed for a while. Quite frankly, if there's an anomaly that if you're an ambulance corps, you can bill for the services that you provide. But if you're a fire department ambulance, you can't. And there's no real rhyme or reason as to why that is. They're just trying to level the playing field so that everybody can bill for the same service. You know, it's not really fair. If you look at, like in your district, you look at two neighboring districts, you know, if you had a heart attack in Ardsley, the Ardsley Sea Corps Volunteer Ambulance Corps is going to transport you, and they can bill you. You could be 2 blocks down the road and have that same heart attack in Elmsford. The Elmsford Fire Department will transport you, but they can't bill you. So the taxpayers are footing the bill for the services that are being provided to everybody, as opposed to the user being able to be billed for part of that service.
It seems to me that that's an archaic rule from the days when people did not have health insurance. But now just about everyone, one way or another, is covered by insurance, or at least we're trying to get everybody covered. And in many cases, we're paying for that very service. And then if the volunteers perform the service, the insurance company doesn't have to pay. And
right.
So I've paid them for nothing, and then my taxes are raised because you need the equipment, you need whatever, so that the volunteers can respond.
Right. And it's actually what they call a soft billing. You know, the insurance company will be billed, but if for whatever reason it doesn't qualify, or they don't go after the, you know, people have this misconception that, you know, suddenly the bill collector is going to be showing up at, you know, at the door of some poor senior citizen who had gotten transported, and, you know, trying to repossess their walker because they didn't pay their bill. But no, it's the insurance company that's going to take care of it. So it's not going to be any money out of pocket.
You know what I find most outrageous is a place like Elmsford is the center of the crossroads of the transportation network for the Northeast. Mm-hmm. You've got 287. You got people going from California to Boston and Maine. If they have an accident on 287, who responds? It's the volunteer firemen from Elmsford. And they're being supported by the property taxpayers of the village of Elmsford. So it would seem to me that this one makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Although we've had a lot of pushback from the ambulance corps, who I guess somehow see that if we don't...
the paid ambulance, not the ambulance corps,
right,
the paid ambulance services.
The paid ambulance services, right. I guess they see that if the volunteers collapse, that this is another source of business for them. But I very much support your efforts in this area. Well, we've got about 30 seconds left. Is there any message that you want to leave to people?
I think the most important thing I could say is that, you know, I know it's a real cliche, but smoke detectors save lives. Make sure your house has smoke detectors. Make sure they're working. Change the batteries. You know, you see, whenever you change your clocks for daylight savings time, change your batteries. Test them regularly. There's never been a multi-fatality in a house that had working smoke detectors. So, you know, get those smoke detectors working. Make sure they're there. And if you ever have any issues with them, contact your local fire department and we'll help you with it.
Common sense advice. Common sense advice. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you all for joining us. Look for us again on Assembly Update.